other experiments just looking at the seed effect. So anyway, long answer, Jay, but that's what we're doing. So.
All right, well, another one that Jen posted, Max McCormick wrote in an article that he discovered a good time to transplant Christmas trees is in the fall, as long as the temperature of the soil is above 50 degrees. Does this apply to all trees, and how does it relate to spring transplanting? I think this is the same question continued.
Yeah.
I received 4 18-inch bare root walnut trees that were dormant 2 weeks ago. The directions said to plant immediately. I did. The ground was not 50 degrees. I also received 8 American chestnut seeds the same time frame that not only had radicals, roots, but shoots of them. I planted them. Will they rot?
Well, that's a good question about planting, especially this year, because we're so far behind in the warmth, basically. I learned this from Max McCormick, actually. He once, years ago, told me, we were, of course, former colleagues on the faculty and worked together on a lot of things. He was in, I think, maybe one of my classes lecturing about planting, and he asked the students, what is the one rule about storing planting stock? And everybody's sitting there, of course, in rapt attention. Nobody knows the answer. Don't do it. So when you get trees or seeds that have germinated, they want to be in the ground, not stored in anywhere, right? Because they'll be happier there. Granted, the ground temperature is ideally 50. I suspect Max's rule about 50 for fall planting. In fall, of course, the temperature is declining, right? So if you don't get them, the key to planting in the fall is you want to get the trees in soon enough so that their roots establish. There's a fall period of root growth after the top of the tree is dormant. If you get the trees in by, say, Labor Day, that's probably right. Yeah, you'll get a fall flush in September still of root growth. The soil's warm enough for that to happen. They will establish then in the soil and won't become desiccated over the winter if they're conifers, right? They're going to probably transpire. Also, in fine textured soils, fall planting is notorious for getting frost heaving, right? The roots don't attach and frost action will pitch them right out of the ground. Whereas now, this time of year, 50 degrees, the temperature, hopefully at least, is on the increase, maybe slower than we like. So if you plant the trees now, they'll be fine. They're probably dormant, right? Well, the chestnuts aren't if the radicals are coming out, but they'll be better off in the ground than they will with any kind of storage facility. If you're planting a large number of trees and you can't get them all in say a few days, you need to get them in the soil. You can heel them in, so-called. You can dig like a little trench, cover them with earth. You don't want to leave them in there for very long, but that will at least keep them out. The key is to keep the roots moist. Don't put them in water. That will drown them, suffocate them. You just want moist. The bags that they'll come in are probably okay for a few days, but you want to get them in the ground. That's the basic rule. Max told me that he got a shipment of sugar maple. He did a big harvest last winter, and he's going to do a lot of planting. He told me that whoever the grower was shipped him a bunch of sugar maple seedlings when the ground was still frozen. Now that's obviously too soon, right? You can't plant trees in frozen ground. So he sent them back. I don't know whoever was thinking they were going to send somebody. This was like in middle of March, right? And the ground is like concrete. But now you could plant safely. I think that was questions from a couple of weeks ago. So that should you should be fine with that.
I guess the other thing that you want to mention where you get your seedlings.
Well, we get them.
Yeah,
I mean, we've done some planting. We get ours from there's no Maine Nursery, of course, anymore. State Nursery hasn't been for a long time. We get them from the state of New Hampshire. They produce nice stock of most of the species we would want. The commercial trees, I guess the one thing we're looking for some bur oak. They don't seem to raise that. But they also have like wildlife and shrub packets for if you want to, establish plantings for birds, other wildlife species. They have native species of a diverse variety. It seems like they grow almost as many shrubs as they do actual trees now, but they do have both. And we haven't ordered from them this year. They are in business. I just looked at their website. You can get trees from them still, I think, if you need some, if they have them.
they'll ship to you, or you can go pick them up. They'll mail a postcard and let you know when the pickup days are. So that can be a little bit of a fun adventure down to New Hampshire.
Just north of Concord.
Yeah. All right. Looks like Chip has written, Chip Bessie, also a contributor to the newsletter, has written a question into the chat and refers to one that he had asked at the end of the last Fireside Forestry. He asks, given climate change, are there new species we might experiment with? Which of our common species will benefit?
Oh, that's the big question, isn't it? Actually, I remember this question from last time, so I've been thinking about it, and I happened to see an article that's just come out from Tony D'Amato and others, and I don't remember the journal. Tony's part of a regional effort to do climate adaptation in forestry. Tony's at Vermont, I guess I said, and they have experimental plantings, excuse me, of this sort around the region. One of them is on the Dartmouth College grant in northern New Hampshire, which is a model forest up there managed by Kevin Evans. And they maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they did plantings of a whole variety of species, native and species that would be south of us, I guess. And the early results, survival is okay. It's sort of what you'd expect. The trees that are not adapted to the climate, and this is northern New Hampshire, right? That's a pretty cold area. Are not doing well, right? They didn't. That was my take, at least on the quick read I gave of the article. The ones that are native are doing better. The survival was better. I think it's way too early to say, of course, because the verdict won't be in for a whole rotation. So I think an overly aggressive approach, like planting things that are native, like tulip popper, sycamore, those kinds of things that would be native to, say, Connecticut, I think is risky still, especially depending on where you are. If you're in New York County, that's probably okay. If you're up in northern Franklin, probably not, et cetera. So Chip, if you have a specific species in mind, I think I love, we're kind of fortunate here. I see Jim Robbins on the line here, that white pine is the winner here, clearly. Again, there was once way more, I see smiling, then 5,000 years ago, there's a lot more white pine here than there is now, and it will certainly be well adapted, as will red oak. So those two trees are, red oak has got the deer problem, of course, harder to regenerate, but once it's established, it grows very well and it's worth money, right? So this is what we want. So things like the spruces, especially white spruce, the boreal species, paper birch, aspens are probably not going to be that well adapted. So the message here really, and I tried to write about this a little bit in both that regeneration article, is that the species that are well adapted to this kind of warming climate and the climate, remember, is going to get, apparently the predictions are warmer and wetter, not drier. So it's not like we need drought tolerant species. We need trees that will thrive in mesy conditions. So, those southern hardwoods should be doing fine, but we're not heavy disturbances like that you would have in the boreal forest, like stand replacing fires and stuff, that would favor those early successional trees, are probably not something you want to be doing much of, because those you could regenerate. Remember the whole issue about regeneration, you can get what appears to be good regeneration that is not well adapted in the long run to the site, or in this case that we're talking about the climate that they're going to be growing in. So clearly, I think if we go with the species that are already native here, but are sort of in the southern part of the state, that will be fine, at least for 100 years, 50 or 100 years.
Good. Yeah, I guess the other answer is what does Bob actually do? And he's been enrichment planting with a mixture of half white pine, half red oak. So
right.
that that's what he's practicing.
Yeah, I would put in red spruce too still, and Norway spruce. Some people don't like Norway spruce because of the weevil issues, but that would be the spruce that be, of course, well adapted to warming climates. You don't want to plant Norway where it's too cold. It'll be killed in the winter. Like you wouldn't do that in Fort Kent. Well, I guess Irving does up there some. They're a little risky, but around here it's perfectly well adapted. Chip wanted me to repeat. Yeah, okay. So the Husqvarna 535 FBX, I guess it is the name of the tool.
And Brad from Mercer had a firewood question, which I love firewood questions because everyone's got. It's another place where there's not a lot of research and everyone's got different opinions. So we'll see what Bob thinks about this one. He's behind, Brad writes, on felling trees for next winter's firewood. He's heard that rather than felling now, he should wait for the leaves to come out. When the leaves on the felled trees dry out, they suck out the sap. What is your advice?
You know, I honestly don't know whether that's true. It's tempting to believe that, but to me, once the leaves are dead, they have no ability to do that anymore. The process of transpiration and the water movement out of trees requires the leaf to be, healthy and essentially photosynthesizing and well hydrated with moisture. So as soon as those leaves dry, I can't picture what the mechanism would be. I realize this is an old practice. I think that I would just cut them. I mean, I don't think you're going to get much benefit by letting them. In fact, I think probably the hydration. We've been noticed cutting off these beech that the tree is just like it's not just maple trees, right? Everything is beginning to hydrate now at this time of year, right before the leaves out. We notice the crowns up here, the beech buds are just beginning to break. There's a lot of sap flow. In fact, it's not the ideal time to be doing this herbicide stump treatment because of the sap flow. So I think the longer you wait, the more sap's going to be in the tree. So I would cut them right now is what I would do. I could actually be wrong about that. There may be other mechanisms, but I don't see how the leaves would do that though once they're dead or withered.
I've certainly heard that before, though.
Yeah.
Maybe you should cut half of the trees now and save half, and then take a moisture meter to them and see report
Life
back.
Is not much of a controlled experiment, is it? Yeah.
All right, Mike from Canada writes that he and his colleagues with the Canadian Forest Service are planning an adaptive silviculture for climate change trial. I think that's similar to the Dartmouth College Forest.
Yeah, it's the same.
At the Petawawa Research Forest, which Bob and I actually drove right through, I believe.
Yeah, we went right by
in February.
A month ago.
Sorry that we didn't stop, Mike. They're focusing on white pine dominated forests, with our main climate challenge being the higher likelihood of drier, more droughty conditions. Our resilience treatment is planned to be an expanding gap, irregular shelter wood. Do you have any advice for using irregular shelter woods for white pine management? Gap size, site type considerations, vegetation control?
Oh, that's a fabulous question, and that deserves a whole article that I will write soon. This is interesting because we just went out and looked at some gaps that were cut on the university forest about 9 years ago now, mostly an aspen-dominated stand with scattered pines, with the attempt to regenerate that to more pine and conifers because the aspen was old and dying and off-site and all of that. So we noticed, and there'd been some, this was done in 2009, a year after that 2008 bumper seed crop we had up here. So initially not much established. So we did site preparation in those gaps. And now they all look fabulous. And again, we put up a Facebook post on this. Every single gap was dominated by pine regeneration from like 2 trees that had been left in the gaps. I mean, it's a silvicultural huge success story. Such that I talked with Keith Canody, our forest manager. It's time to, I think, expand those gaps. This expanding gap irregular shelter wood system is one that we devised probably, it's 25 years ago now. We have experiments on the Penobscot forest. It's an old German system, really, that landowners are beginning to practice more and more of. And that one of the keys is, so the gap size, as I've talked in that article that I wrote and other times, is not the critical issue. The gap size, what you need to do is leave light shade, light retention in the gap itself. like I'm talking here, maybe 5 trees per acre. Not a large, and make sure that they're big, large crowned seed-bearing trees. That, and also and just close enough so that they will shade, cast light shade over much of the gap, not heavy shade. You need that light shelter wood effect to get regeneration of virtually all of our species. They do not do well in the bright sun. So once you start leaving retention of the right level in the gap, the size of the gap is irrelevant, really. These gaps were pretty small. They could have been made somewhat bigger. And I think if you then, after time's elapsed and it's time, you want to do this irregular shelterwood approach, you go in and you can expand harvest, in other words, around the edge of the gap where you're getting some side light in from where advanced regeneration has begun to develop. And then release that by taking off much of the overstory. Again, you want to leave a little bit of retention at seed sources in those gaps. So that's the real message on the gap-based irregular shelterwood, is to leave the right kind of retention in it to give you light shade. And then just go with the stand. One of the elements of a prescription like this, if you're making it silviculturally, is the percent of the area in gaps in the whole stand. If you really want to transition it's a good way to transition an old even age forest into a more irregular multi-age one by regenerating it in episodically over time. Like on, say, probably I think the sweet spot in our forest is like a 15-year cycle. And our hope on our lands and our goal is on these 8 woodlots we own now is to keep about 20% of the area. And this is within the stands, not by stand. This is like in gaps, maybe say, just to pick a number, about a ½ acre to an acre in size with light retention. Roughly 20% of our land should be under regeneration. And if the deer don't eat up all the hardwoods, that should, so what is under regeneration? We say it's out of regeneration once the trees grow up and are maybe 20 feet tall and are entering the mid-story. Now it's successfully regenerated. It's a young age class in that stand, so it's time to regenerate more. So every entry on a 15-year cutting cycle, you would then regenerate some percentage, like 20%. It could be higher if you have like this old aspen situation I mentioned, where if you think through that, I mean, if you take 20%, it's going to take 100 years before you get through it. That's too long. So you can do a third. I mean, there's no sort of rules written in stone here. What you should just do what makes sense based on this, what we call the matrix forest. I think in our case, we have mostly nice long life species that'll last a long time. And of course, we want to grow those out. They're not mature, most of them. So we put the regeneration in pockets of short-lived trees like fir, and where we're eliminating the beech and other things of that sort, aspen, and then keeping the long-lived trees in the matrix, our northern hardwoods and pine and oak and hemlock.
Good. All right. I think also you might check out, Bob's got a YouTube webinar on irregular shelterwood, and there's another one on white pine management, if I'm correct.
Yeah, where we talk about both of these, yeah.
And I would, Mike, feel free to follow up with Bob. Those photos that we took of the expanding gaps, I thought were really, really illustrative. So
it's a striking success, and we didn't spend a nick other than the effort we spent on doing the site preparation, which was just, we have an old John Deere skidder. This is the university forest. We just went out and cut down a big old hemlock tree, cut it in half, and then skidded it around these gaps, in 2 chokers, just stirring up, just lightly, knocking over all the advanced fir regeneration and lightly scarifying the forest floor. And then that 2011 seed crop must have taken. It didn't look like it did initially, but boys, it sure looks good now. And this is another example. If you just apply basic principles of silviculture, leave light shade, leave good seed sources. If you have an impediment in the forest floor, light site preparation, break up that organic layer can be helpful. If you just do all that and be a little patient, things are probably going to turn out well for you. So. Good. All right, we have.
Okay, now in the chat box, we have Cliff and Robin Singer have posed a question. It's got a lot of details, so you may want to read along. I'll still read it though. As a 50-acre woodlot owner, we would like to know what non-invasive plantings native to Maine will be excellent for all types of wildlife, including birds, habitat, and food. The woodlot is composed of spruce, white pine, some cedar, and white silver birch. The regions are Franklin County and Oxford County, the Bemis Mountain areas, and perhaps surrounding counties. The woodlot is a gradient. Gradient is level to 5 degrees at elevation 1600. That's 20% of the woodlot. Gradients from 1600, 80% of the woodlot is 30 degrees for 1.2 miles, which is situated on part of Bemis.
So it's,
Mountain.
yeah, it's okay. Soils are Telos Monarda.
Yep, reaching into the soil from a
Yeah.
layman's viewpoint, you find a lot of yellowish, sandy, fine sand to coarse sandy gravel. Our plan is to plant your suggestions on the borders of the property. So you're, be careful, you better make a good suggestion there. As much of the woodlot will be timber harvested in about 5 years. Planting heights and overall size does not matter. However, large spreading plants are okay as long as they provide habitat and food to help our forest, birds, and animals.
Well, this is I'm sure a common question, and I'm not a great expert on shrubs, the ecology of shrubs. Of course, the first thing you want to do is make sure that these species are native. When you think of shrubs that would be valuable to birds, you think of the viburnums, the different like nannyberry, high bush cranberry, all those. You want species that are going to be producing mast or seeds, soft and hard. These in this case, soft mast, we call them, berries. Hazelnut, serviceberry. Actually, when I got this question, I said, okay, well, that's the first thing we do. Let's just look and see what advice is available. If you Google the Maine Cooperative Extension website here on campus, Lois Stack has written several excellent pages on native shrubs, or actually all of Maine's native species, but especially native shrubs, their ecology, their site requirements, even who sells them. I notice New Hampshire, you can get packets from the New Hampshire Nursery with mixtures of species that would include the ones I mentioned and others. But like anything, I'm a little nervous if these shrubs are generally species that I think that need at least some, if not full sunlight. And so I'm getting a mixed message here, and if you're on the line, you can respond to this. That if you're about to harvest the timber on the property, I get the sense that this is a fully stocked mature forest, right up to the property line. Planting anything in that understory environment, if that's what it is, would be problematic. It's not like it's going to die, but it's certainly not going to thrive unless you open that area up some. You picture planting these shrubs more in like areas that have been heavily disturbed in a harvest, like around the landing. Clear cuts that have been developed, maybe were done by the previous owner that you wouldn't have done, but you've inherited them, right? And now you got to do something to rehab them. These would be all good places to plant shrubs. Well, the other thing about planting, take care, right? And it's critical to plant not only in a place where the trees will, or the shrubs in this case, will have enough sunlight to thrive, but also that they're not going to experience competition from other plants, in this case, probably over the trees, right? The commercial trees that would be growing up around them and shading them out, right? This is why shrubs don't dominate the forest cover, right? In Maine, typically they're earlier successional, sort of old field successional wetland. I mean, of course, they do dominate wetlands. I shouldn't say they don't do that on wetlands. They do it on uplands. They're not going to thrive. But so plant them well and do take care to control the competition around them. And that just means if you can do that with herbicides if you want prior to planting, although that won't last for a long time. You can also, a more permanent solution we've used for where we have problems, like especially if you're planting in sod, is to use what are called brush blankets. They're just 4 by 4 foot squares of landscape fabric that you staple to the ground with landscape staples. That's lights out, right? That kills everything around the tree. There's a little hole in the middle for your plant. And that lasts for 10 years. So that will completely control everything within a 2 foot distance around that plant, or whatever size you choose. You could just buy rolls of this stuff and make whatever size you want, right? So that's a way better way. It's very labor intensive, of course, to do this, but you're paying a lot for these shrubs and you want them to live, right? So So check out the Cooperative Extension website, go look around, and then for sources of planting stock. And then you probably, at this point, you might be a little late. You could probably, if you had your stock now, you could go, certainly be perfect to go plant it in the next few weeks. But growers are often out of things this time of year. This year's so weird, who knows what's going on. Yeah, so that's my general advice without seeing the property.
I really like the Maine Audubon, the Forestry for the Birds materials. There's some materials designed for foresters if you're working with a forester, and then there's some for landowners as well. And they give you a lot of ideas for how to, I guess using the layman's terms, look at the different bird habitat and structures that are on your property. And it's it isn't about necessarily specific species, but how you can think about the different kinds of habitat that you're providing, how to have as much variety as possible. So I'd recommend checking out Maine Audubon for that. Jen said that she was going to, Jen, why don't
Yep. There's one person on the phone, and I've unmuted the phone caller. If you have a question, this would be a great chance to ask.
No, thank you.
Okay.
All
Just
right.
want to make sure you had that opportunity.
All right. Well, then continuing to work through the chat box, we've got Chip Bessie asked your thoughts about white oak. I like white oak, if you want my opinion.
White oak is a favorite. Yeah, I would definitely, white oak I think is a winner. Of course, white oak I think was once relatively common along the Maine coast, right? I think from early settlers' accounts, and there are some stands or trees at least still surviving. I've got a few white oaks that I've dug up in New Hampshire 40 years ago now, planted on my land in Kentucky, and they're thriving. I think in central Maine, I'm not sure if there's any white oak in Fort Kent or Presque Isle, but for your area, Chip, I think white oak could be a real winner. Now, long-lived and valuable, but it is slow growing, right? You have to nurture white oak. It's and of course the deer would eat it off. You'd have to put that in tubes or protect it somehow with cages for that to work. But yeah, I think that would be a winner. Or bur oak too. If the site is wetter, which that is native, at least to sort of alluvial floodplain sites in central Maine. We have a fair amount of bur oak, and it's there's one right here in Orono that's probably, 40 inches in diameter, right in the Webster Park. That must be a relic of the old growth forest. That thing is just huge and just thriving.
And that's, we're volunteering, we're lifetime members of the Orono Land Trust, and one of our projects is we're helping them with, along the Stillwater River, up in the alluvial floodplain of the Stillwater River, not directly on the river, but they had a Japanese knotweed problem that they weren't sure how to deal with, and lots of people are worried about, or many people are in a never-ending battle with their Japanese knotweed, and think we've got a solution for that.
Not me, I take them out, they're done.
It's a multi-year process, but we're doing that, but now that the knotweed has been is under management, now there's nothing there except buckthorn and honeysuckle. So it's just a awful place in need of native species restoration. So it doesn't have a commercial timberland objective. And we really wanted to think about a thoughtful alternative for to the knotweed, and so we've thought that bur oak would be a good solution there. And the university forest has some similar habitat that is growing native bur oak, and they've given us permission to pull some of the seedlings and move them to the Orono Land Trust property. So
that'll be interesting.
Yeah, that's we're just waiting for enough of the leaves to come out for us to be able to identify the seedlings to pull them. But we'll try to do it while it's still wet so that they pull easily. All right, Mike says, thanks. And Jordan writes, are there any benefits for Maine landowners to invest in the carbon credits program? What are some incentives for landowners? What management methods would be most beneficial to balance long-lived forests and harvest revenue?
Well, it was the last newsletter, right? We had a compilation of those landowners that had enrolled in carbon credit programs. Most of this is driven by the California market. And of course, that you wonder how stable that is, but you can now get paid for doing things that store more carbon than the average landowner, the average acre that's out there in the landscape. It's pretty clear to me. Now, this is, people's opinion varies on this, but if you really, anything that grows trees to large size and then eventually harvest them for solid wood products that go into buildings or furniture or other long-lived structures, not to the landfill, in other words, like paper products, is a winner carbon-wise. The best study I know about this was done by Chris Henniger and others in New Brunswick, where they looked at J.D. Irving's ownership in northern New Brunswick, and this is a life cycle kind of thing. And it's like, okay, so they compared aggressive plantation, short rotation silviculture to longer natural forest management on, that would be like 50 years for Irving, to 100 to 120 year rotations for long live northern hardwoods, to actually putting it all in reserves, right? Not cutting any of it, right? Which would, in the short run, build up lots of carbon, sequester lots of carbon on those acres. And what they found, interestingly, this is good news for those of us that like silviculture and management, is that the long rotation silviculture beat out the reserves. Those two were about similar for quite a while, but in the long-term future, managing forests on longer rotations for high-value solid wood products, because of the life cycle of those not just because the trees are sequestering large amounts of carbon, but then that carbon, more of that carbon, once it's harvested, is stored, you know, it's just around in buildings and furniture for another 200 or 300 years, right? Instead of going to the landfills, paper products are shorter live consumer goods. So, so that's my take on it. The starting conditions are important here. If you're starting with mostly a heavily cut over young forest, then clearly that the best thing to do with that is just to let it grow. You don't have many options to harvest it anyway, right? So, but you'll be below the baseline, so you probably won't be able to claim any carbon credits. The thing I think of course, this is very data intensive, as well as contractually binding. So if I think you need to sign long-term contracts that commit, and even buying insurance against, catastrophic losses, right? So what happens if a hurricane comes, blows down all your timber? Well, I mean, that carbon is now dead, right? And it's going to decompose or be harvested. So that you need insurance against that, because we can't avoid everything. So those long-term contracts and the data-intensive nature of these things tend to limit it's a very specialized kind of practice. That there's a few consulting firms that specialize in this. And of course, they make their money by doing these carbon projects, selling the carbon to and then paying the landowners some portion of that money that they get back. But that has to be monitored. So you would have to pay them, or somebody has to pay to have these large properties monitored fairly frequently with permanent forest plots. So this is going to rule out most small landowners who, I mean, even I know how to do this. I measured trees all my life. We have lots of plots, and I look at and we could probably claim credits because we have high stocking levels, but it's just, the process seems to me to be so daunting that I just as soon stay in the regular timber business, at least for now. And we're going to be doing good anyway. We're just not going to get paid for it. So.
One of our graduate students was working and doing analysis for larger landowners on whether they should participate or not. And she had found that about 1,000 acres was really where it started. 1,000 acres and more is where it started to make sense. Yeah. It might take a while.
I'm tempted to try it, actually, but I've got too many other things that are keeping me busy right now.
Jen wanted to say something about carbon credits.
Yeah, we've been, if I'm sure everybody has noticed, we are featuring carbon and forests in our newsletter almost every month at this point. Mm-hmm. And Tom and a few other of our board members participate in the Climate Council, the State of Maine Climate Council, trying to figure out what role forests play in the carbon, addressing carbon and climate change. And Bob, I think you expressed it right. You know, it's still the wild, wild west in a lot of ways, and it's hard to know if it's good investment still. Our series is really focusing in on just providing the data and the science, allowing people to kind of come up with their own conclusions based on that. Additionally, so Lloyd Erlin has been our point of the spear on this issue. He's really been pushing it. He thinks it's an important conversation. We need, you know, it needs to be data driven, science driven. He will be one of our speakers in May. We have 6 programs coming up, or 7 actually, because we've got something next week. He's going to be one of them. So check our website to see the date and to get signed up to participate in that conversation. He will run with that hard. So he's very interested in this. But I think the bottom line is for small woodland owners, it's difficult to jump into this bandwagon right now. So I just wanted to, that's the extent of my knowledge on that issue as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Looks like James Robbins
Robbins
has his hand up, and jump right in, please. James?
Yes, I have a question for Bob on white pine reproduction. When we do shelter wood harvest, and sometimes if we have a good seed year and we've stratified the soil, we get way too much white pine reproduction. I've seen some pictures of some jobs you've done, Bob, where it's similar. It's thick and hair on a dog.
That's
and
right.
The question is, how do we deal with that? Because if we leave it thick, about the time it gets 5 or 6 feet high, you get a heavy snowstorm and it lays down like hay. And if you thin it too soon, you're going to have trouble with white pine weevil. So how do we deal with that?
That's a great question. We've been the university has been is thinning it with brush saws on about a Keith Canody's. We've going everywhere between a 6 to 10 foot spacing when the trees are about 10 years old. Now we do this with a light overstory. The overwood is not completely gone yet at this stage. Well, actually, in some cases it is, where we did it experimentally, but normally we would not do that. And we are, of course, very nervous about this, but but I put in some plots. This was a case of, just like you described, Jim. It lays over just like hay. That's a horrible metaphor, right? For when you got to stand a crop of trees that you don't want that to happen to. And we measured we took some samples in these young stands, and it's like, I was really proud of this when we first did it, right? It's like, look at this beautiful regeneration. Then when I started wading in there, the crown started to recede at about age 6, right? Because they were so dense. And then I noticed that the trees were getting very spindly, even the dominant trees, right? So we measured that. There's a metric, that ratio of height to diameter. So the height of the tree to the diameter, in this case, right, usually you use DBH. In this case, we just used the ground line diameter. And it was already getting to the critical threshold of about 80 to 1, right? In other words, the trees are 80 times as tall as they were in diameter in the same units. And it's like, Keith, we got to do something here. So we just spent the money to do the essentially pre-commercial spacing in those stands. And these are pure pine. I mean, it's an opportunity to do other things too. That god-awful wet snow we had last week or whenever, 2 weeks ago, I guess when it took the power out on us, was just terrible, because he just done a bunch of this thinning like the year before. And I said, Keith, I just don't want to go out there with you and look at those trees. But so he went out, he went out that next morning, took his crew, right? Everybody's going out in their own pickups now, but it's only like 5 miles out to this block. And they all went out and started shaking the snow off the trees. Now, this is pretty intensive, right? But they righted them all, and they're fine. Right now, what would have happened if you got 100 like Jim's, like your operations? You probably can't do that with every single tree. But that would have been way worse had we not thinned, right? Then you would have just had wholesale collapse, just like your hay analogy. That's perfect, actually. I've seen that happen, actually. Usually it takes a little longer. I've seen it in about 20-year-old stands where you get up about 20 feet, and they just collapse. The whole thing will just fold right over in a small gap. So that's right. You do need to be thinning those trees. There's just no way around it, Jim. I mean, it's not going to, that's a case that's not going to sort out by itself, I don't think, very well with that high density. Yeah. Now people say, of course, this is the reason we don't plant that dense, but so we get that success, it is expensive to do that thinning, a couple $100 an acre at least to do it. And we do it, of course, with our own crews. With the difference, there's the Weevil issue, but when you think about it, even if you're spacing 10 by 10, you still got 400 trees per acre, roughly. That's plenty, you know, and if some of them get Weevil, the stands will close in. We can take those out in thinnings. And if you have some big trees around, that will to some degree take the Weevil pressure off of those. And I think things will be fine, but that's, yeah, it's the cost of being too successful, I guess.
So at what height would you recommend that we start doing that thinning?
So I would say we've done it when it's really, really dense, like 10 feet. Yeah, no more than 10 years. We're right in there at 10 years. If they're super dense, right? If you go into the stand and you can't see the ground, right? And you can't even see your neighbor, your buddy that's 20 feet away, you need to thin. That's the rule. So,
Okay.
And that's, you know, this is 100,000 trees per acre though. I remember I had the students count them when I was still teaching. We go out and it's like, wow, they're everywhere. We just overdid the site prep, I think. And we had such a seed crop. That was really mostly, that particular event was that it wasn't just the seed crop, it was the following 2009 summer. Remember in 2009, we had 60 inches of rain and yeah, no summer, right? But it just rained and rained and rained. So if you have those conditions in May and June, every seed will germinate, right? Unlike normally when the forest floor dries out and only the seeds in the really good microsites will take and grow. That year, everything grew and, you know, and took, right? By the fall, we had all these trees. It's like, wow. I guess be careful. That's a classic. Be careful what you wish for. You know, you do everything right, and it comes out too good. But we're managing it, and it looks so. Yeah, I would do it. Yeah, contract that out and get that thinning done.
Thank you.
We are out of time. That flew by really fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jen, do you want to take over?
Yeah. Yeah. Someone was asking about chainsaw safety class in southern Maine. I don't have an answer for that. Does anybody know of a class? I think, unfortunately, because of our social distancing, you know, most programs are virtual. There's no in-person programs happening. There was talk about us trying to find someone running a chainsaw program on video. So it could happen. And I know that there's a women's chainsaw class that's trying to, you know, do something virtual as well. So I'll put something on our website if I find anything around chainsaw.
Great. That would be, yeah, we're definitely working on our woodlots, but with we are considering safety quite heavily in our choices about what we're choosing to do so that we don't become a burden on the medical system by felling large trees on us. We're trying to do stuff that's very well within our comfort zone that we've done a lot, as well as just doing extra attention to safety and running through possible hazards and things like that. So I hope everyone is doing that.
We should, of course, be doing that anyway, but it does sharpen your senses.
JSB mentioned Maine Coast Heritage Trust. Check their website and see if they have anything scheduled on that. But yeah, we got to keep, I think that's one of the things with our organization. We really want to make sure that we're not, we want to keep the flow information going, and we want to make sure everybody's staying involved in their woodlots, even though it's not business as usual. So that's the idea for this series. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Bob and Jessica. And I'm sorry I didn't congratulate you on your Tree Farmer of the Year celebration. We hopefully will be having a field day at Wickeby Woods in September. September 12th is the Forestry Field Day, celebrating Bob and Jessica and all their efforts on their property. So we'll keep everyone posted on that. But again, we're excited to have you. This is such a great service. May 8th is the next Fireside Forestry. And again, please visit our website to find out all the events that we're having virtual and all the issues that we're going to be discussing. This is a service for our members as well as the general public. If you're not a member, please consider becoming one. It's a great service. You get a newsletter every month with Bob. A lot of Bob's information is in there, and we'll get Jessica to write again. She's been very protective of her time, but we'll get her back.
I heard that.
Please email me if you have any further questions. I'll send them on to Bob. Jen
Or
at
you can-
mainwoodlandowners.org. We'd love to hear from you. And Tom is always available at tom@mainwoodlandowners.org, or give us a call at our office, 626-0005. Leave a message. We'll get back to you. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll sign off here.
Yeah.
Thank
See you
you.
in May.
Okay,
Bye, everyone.
go back to your woodlot.